In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you a framework that takes the vision you have for your law practice and turns it into work blocks on your calendar by Monday morning. Why am I confident of that? Because I needed this framework myself. I have a vision statement for my law practice. It's written down, it's thought through, it's thorough. But for the first 18 months I had it, it did absolutely nothing to change my practice. Nothing. If that sounds familiar to you, this episode is for you. Let me tell you what I was missing. Quick note before we begin. Nothing in this podcast is legal advice, and no attorney-client relationship is created by listening. There's a full disclaimer at the end of the episode. In this episode, episode 5, I'm covering chapter 3 of Time Management for Attorneys, a lawyer's guide to decreasing stress, eliminating interruptions, and getting home on time by Mark Powers and Sean McNalis, published by Atticus. The chapter is titled Proactive Strategy 3, Set Strategic Goals. If you do not already have a copy of this book, I encourage you to get one so you can follow along. Let's get into it. I am Robert Bunn. This is Estate Planning for Lawyers. In Chapter 1, we wrote the personal vision. In Chapter 2, we wrote the professional vision. 2 documents, 2 horizons, both of them pointing somewhere you want to be. And here's where most attorneys quietly stall out. Because a vision statement by itself will not move you towards anything. It is a destination on paper. Powerful, yes, but not actionable. Chapter 3 is the bridge. Powers and McNalis introduce what they call strategic goals. Their idea, paraphrased, is that you place a series of small steps between the vision you wrote and the practice you actually live in today. They use the metaphor of stepping stones, and I think it is a very useful image to hold on to. They also offer a tool, the goal grid, that I want to walk you through, because once you use it, it will change your practice. Here's what this episode is going to do for you. By the end, you will have a framework you can apply Monday morning, not next quarter, not after the next CLE, Monday. Powers and McNalis describe strategic goals as small, specific, action-based commitments that move you incrementally towards a larger vision. The stepping stone metaphor I mentioned moments ago is the picture they use and is a good one. There's a line in the chapter I want to call out, and I'm going to quote it briefly because I thought it was profound. The authors write that your future is influencing your present. That is their phrasing. Sit with that. It is a different way of thinking about goal setting than most attorneys are taught. We are taught to look at the calendar in front of us. The matters open this week. The deadlines this month. The framework Powers and McNalis are offering inverts that. You start at the destination, you work backwards into today. The chapter offers a list of action words to brainstorm with, and a separate list of words the author specifically warns you to avoid. I will not reproduce the list here, see the book for the full list, but the principle is what matters, and it is this. The authors push you to verbs you can actually see yourself performing, things you can prove you did. They warn you away from mental words, the kind of words that are too open to interpretation. You cannot prove you know something. You cannot prove you understand, but you can prove you wrote, you taught, you hired, or filed. Action verbs create accountability. Mental verbs create wiggle room. That is the principle Powers and McNalis are pointing at. This is the same principle every good litigator already knows. A pleading that says my client experienced harm is weaker than one that says my client lost $43,000 of revenue between March and June. Specificity is power. The authors are applying that same discipline to your own life. Powers and McNalis include a case study in this chapter. It is the story of a Florida attorney who used this framework to pivot his practice and build the career he wanted. I'm not going to walk you through the details of his story, but I want to share with you is what I took away from reading it. The thing that stayed with me was not the destination. It was the line at the end where the attorney reflects on whether he actually ever achieved the original goal. He's honest about it. He says, in essence, he is not certain he ever became exactly what he set out to become, But he says the exercise itself, the writing it down, the breaking it into pieces, the working backwards, that is what got him the practice he has today, which is very impressive. Listen to that carefully. He didn't say the goal got achieved. He said the exercise got him the practice he wanted. That's the real point of the chapter. The act of doing the work changes you, even if the destination shifts along the way. And honestly, the destination almost always shifts along the way. That is not failure. That is what growth looks like. Let me bring this into my own world for a moment, because I want to be honest about how I have used this and where I have also failed to use it. When I launched Bunn.Law LLC, I had a vision. Estate planning, outsourced general counsel work for small to mid-sized businesses, and some AI-related consulting as well, which I know a lot about. That was the destination. But I will tell you the truth. For the first stretch, I did not have strategic goals. I had a vision and a calendar full of urgent client work. But the gap between those two things is exactly what Powers and McNalis are warning against. What changed for me was when I started naming the action verbs, not build a strong estate planning practice. That is a wish. The strategic goals look more like this. Enroll in wealth counsel. Draft a complete estate planning portfolio for a real client. Record a podcast episode every week. File a trademark application for the emergency manual trademark and artificially intelligent law mark. Publish on YouTube on a set release schedule. After each one of those is something I can actually see myself doing. Each one has a deadline, and each one completed is a small win that compounds. That is the architecture the authors are pointing at. I'll also tell you where I still struggle. Long horizon goals, the 5-year goals. I am better at the first quarter than I am at the 5th year. And the chapter has me thinking about that gap because the authors are clear that without the longer horizon written down, the quarterly work has nothing to aim at, no direction. Now let's talk about the tool itself. Powers and McNalis call it the goal grid. It is their framework, and I want to credit to them very clearly. What I'm about to walk you through is the structure they lay out in the chapter. In the structure Powers and McNalis lay out, you start out with one commitment from your professional vision statement. 1, not 5, 1. You write at the top. Then, in their framework, you build out working backwards from the destination, what you will do at each time horizon. The structure the authors use in the chapter is a 5-year design, which stops at the 5-year mark, the 3rd year, the 1st year, and then quarterly goals for the upcoming year, 3rd quarter, 2nd quarter, 1st quarter. The exercise the authors recommend is this. Pretend you have already met the goal. Then ask yourself how your life looks different. Work backwards from there. What would you have had to do in year 3 for this to be reality in year 5? What would have you had to do in year 1 for it to be true in year 3? And what would you have had to do this quarter for that to be true a year from now? This is a discipline most attorneys never apply to their own practice, even though we apply it to client matters every day. When we plan a litigation strategy, we work backwards from trial. We do not plan forward from filing. The author's goal grid is asking you to do for your career what you already do for your cases. And there's one more piece the authors are explicit about. Every goal needs a deadline. The chapter makes the point bluntly. The authors say, in essence, that a goal without a deadline is just a wish. Let me give you a concrete example of how this applies to my life and experience. Years before I built an estate planning practice, I was a prosecutor, an assistant state attorney for the Office of the State Attorney for the 10th Judicial Circuit, Felony Circuit for Polk County's 10th Judicial Circuit. And one of the first things I learned how to do for every case that I tried, start with the jury instructions, not the police report, not the witness list, the jury instructions. Because the jury instructions tell you the elements of each and every count, the specific things that have to be proven beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt for the state to meet its burden and win its case. Once I knew those elements cold, every other decision in the case got filtered through one question. Does it move me closer to proving an element, or does it not? If it did not, it was noise. I dropped it. That is exactly what Powers and McNalis are asking you to do with your career. Start at the verdict you want, the practice you are trying to build, and work backwards through the elements you have to prove to get there. Everything else is noise. Stephen Covey called this habit 2. Begin with the end in mind in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It is the same principle, named differently, and it is one of the most reliable disciplines in professional life. Powers and McNalis are applying it to your practice. I'm telling you, it works in a courtroom too. Near the end of the chapter, Powers and McNalis cite a senior practice advisor with Atticus named Patrick Wilson. Wilson tells clients, paraphrased, the strategic goals are worthless unless you apply what he calls the most powerful force in the universe. Wilson's phrase for it is ink on your calendar. Wilson's underlying principle closes out the chapter. Today, most of us are not working with paper calendars anymore, although I find them particularly useful from time to time. We are generally working with Outlook, Google, Clio, whatever the firm runs on. So let me offer the same idea and language built for the way attorneys actually work today. I'm referring to it as calendared and committed. If it's not calendared and committed, it does not exist. That is the standard. Wilson's principle and mind are the same. A goal that lives in a Word document is intellectual. A goal that lives on the calendar with a recurring block with a real time slot with the same protected status as a court appearance is operational. The act of putting a deadline next to a goal and then putting into work blocks for that goal into the actual hours of the actual week is what converts intention to actual behavior. This is also where most attorneys lose. We treat client calendaring as sacred. Court dates, closings, meetings, filing deadlines, those go into the calendar without negotiation. But the strategic goals, the ones that move our own practice forward, get pushed into the empty space at the end of the week, end of the day, or the empty space on the weekend, which means they almost never happen. If you take one operational thing from this chapter, take this. Treat your strategic goals the way you treat a court deadline. Calendared and committed. Recurring blocks. Protected, not optional. That is Patrick Wilson's principle, dressed for a digital practice. Here are 5 concrete things you can do this week to put Chapter 3 to work. Not next quarter, not after the next bar conference. Monday. 1. Pull out your professional vision statement and pick one commitment from it. Just one. Write it at the top of a fresh page. 2. Brainstorm using the kinds of action verbs the authors recommend in the chapter. Pick the verbs you can actually see yourself performing. And stay away from the kind of mental words that the authors warn against. The full list is in the book. 3. Imagine yourself 5 years from now having achieved that one commitment. Work backwards using the goal grid Powers and McNalis lay out. What were you doing in year 3? In year 1? This quarter? Next quarter? 4. Put a date next to every single goal you wrote. Not a season, not a year, a date. The principle the authors hammer in this chapter is the difference between a goal with a deadline and a wish without one. 5. Open your calendar and put recurring calendar blocks on it for the first quarter goals. Make them recurring. Make them protected. Make them as non-negotiable as a Monday morning court appearance. Calendared and committed. That is Patrick Wilson's principle brought into your digital workflow. Do those 5 things, and you will have done more strategic planning for your own practice in one setting than most attorneys do in a year. My personal takeaway from Chapter 3 is something I want to say plainly. I've spent a lot of my career being good at other people's deadlines, court deadlines, client deadlines, board deadlines. I was a state attorney. I was general counsel at a private equity firm for over 15 years. I was very good at the deadlines that were handed to me by other people. What I have been learning, and I'm still learning, is how to give myself deadlines, how to have agency and intentional autonomy, how to treat my own goals with the same seriousness I have always given to other people's. The goal grid Powers and McNalis layout, and the calendared and committed discipline that grew out of Patrick Wilson's principles. is exactly the framework for that. If you're an attorney whose own work always slides to the bottom of the list, this chapter is for you. And it is for me too. We are working through this together. Quick reminder, nothing in this podcast or video is legal advice. And no attorney-client relationship is formed by listening, watching, commenting, or reaching out. The information presented here is general and educational. It is not a substitute for advice from a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction reviewing your specific facts. The views I share are my own on behalf of Bunn.Law, PLLC. All Rights and Time Management for Attorneys, a Lawyer's Guide to Decreasing Stress, Eliminating Interruptions, Getting Home on Time by Mark Powers and Sean McNalis, published by Atticus, belong to their respective owners. My discussion is commentary and analysis, and neither the authors nor the publisher have endorsed or affiliated with this show. If you're serious about building an estate planning practice, the books authored by Mark Powers and Sean McNalis deserve a permanent place on your shelf. We will be working through more of their books in this series, so make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next from Estate Planning for Lawyers. I will welcome you in the next video.